My name is Clara Mitchell, and I'm 22 years old. I've spent most of my life wondering if I could ever feel like I truly belonged to someone, or if I was destined to be invisible. When I was 13, my world shattered. My mother, Catherine, was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, and in what felt like a blink of an eye, she went from being my rock to a mere shadow of herself. She fought hard, but the disease ravaged her body, and when she died, it felt like everything else in my life died with her. My father, Gerald, couldn't handle the loss. For a year, he became a shell of the man he once was. His life revolved around his job at the aerospace plant, where he numbed himself with routine. At home, he didn't talk much. There was no laughter, no joy, just silence. I tried to reach out to him, but how could I help someone who was already so broken? Then Simone Caldwell came into our lives. Simone was a bartender at Hank's Steakhouse, a place my dad had started going to every Thursday after work. She was 34, blonde, with eyes that could pierce you. Her confidence was magnetic, the kind that made people feel both drawn to her and afraid of her at the same time. I'd only met her a handful of times, but when Dad started dating her, I wasn't prepared for the changes she would bring. They dated for 5 months before he proposed, and to my horror, she moved in with us shortly after. 3 suitcases, an attitude that screamed, "I'm in charge," and a determination to erase every trace of my mother from our home. Simone claimed she was doing what was best for our family. She said we couldn't move forward while living in the past. But what she really meant was that she wanted to wipe my mother out of existence. Simone tore down the landscape watercolors that had once hung in the living room, replacing them with black and white photography that felt cold and lifeless. Mom's beloved green walls were painted over with harsh charcoal gray. I was confused. How could my father let this happen? "Clara," she'd say with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "we need to move on." But all I felt was anger and a deep sense of loss. Every part of our home that once felt like my mother's was now stripped away, replaced by Simone's vision of what a family should look like. And as much as my father tried to convince me otherwise, I knew. He had abandoned us, and now he was letting Simone take over. Simone's power didn't stop at the walls. She began setting rules. Curfews, chores, a written schedule for everything. My phone was confiscated every night at 9 p.m., as though I couldn't be trusted. It felt like I was being punished for something I hadn't done, something beyond my control. "Teenagers need structure," she'd say, as though she were a mother figure, despite having zero interest in actually being one. She wasn't trying to be my mother. She was trying to erase her. And Dad? He stood by silently. He didn't argue, didn't fight. He simply went along with it, desperate to feel something other than grief. He had long stopped being the father I once knew. But I wasn't ready to accept this new reality. I was still just a girl grieving the mother I had lost. And now, I was losing my father too. Simone wasted no time in taking control. The first change she made was subtle, at least on the surface. She began to dictate the rules of the house with an iron fist, as if it were her right to shape everything around her. Curfews were the first to be set. On school nights, I was expected to be home by 8:30. Weekends, 9:30. It didn't matter that I was 16, with a social life, with friends who I needed to spend time with to feel like a normal teenager. Every time I asked for an extension, just 1 extra hour to enjoy time away from the suffocating house, Simone would dismiss me with a cold, flat look. "You need to learn discipline," she would say. "Structure is important." As though I was the one who had been the problem. I remember the first time she took my phone. It was a Tuesday, the night before a major history test. I had stayed up late to study, but when I finished, I reached for my phone to check messages from my friends. Simone was in the kitchen, making her nightly ritual of coffee while Dad sat in front of the TV, barely noticing her presence. "Clara," she called sharply, "give me your phone." I froze. "Why?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "It's 9 p.m. You know the rules," she replied, her voice as hard as stone. I wanted to protest. I wanted to tell her how ridiculous it was, how much I needed my phone to stay connected to the outside world. But I didn't. I handed it over quietly, my heart sinking further into the pit it had been in since Simone had first moved in. "I'll need you to keep up with the chores, too," she added, as if she hadn't already made that clear when she first moved in. Laundry, dishes, vacuuming. I had to do it all, and I did it without complaint, not because I wanted to, but because I was tired of arguing. There was no point in protesting anymore. If I did, Simone would twist everything, making me the villain. Dad would listen to her, just as he always did. "You never do your part around here, Clara," she'd say, shaking her head in disapproval. "I have to do everything myself because you're too busy sulking." And if I dared to push back, if I dared to stand up for myself, "Clara," Dad would say, "you need to respect your stepmother. She's trying to build a family here." Her version of building a family was controlling every single aspect of my life, and Dad, my own father, was blind to it. He couldn't see that Simone wasn't trying to build anything at all. She was just tearing everything down, one piece at a time. Simone even went as far as to critique my appearance. "Clara, those jeans are getting snug. Maybe you should skip breakfast tomorrow." Or, "Don't you want boys to notice you? Try a different hairstyle." Every word was a knife, but I couldn't escape. My father, the man who should have protected me, was too lost in his own grief to notice the damage Simone was causing. Every critique, every rule felt like a punch, but what could I do? I had nowhere else to go. My home was no longer mine. It was Simone's. Things changed the night after my 17th birthday. It wasn't the kind of celebration I'd hoped for. No cake, no balloons, just a silent dinner where Simone's presence seemed more like an executioner's shadow than anything resembling joy. That night, I had stayed out a little too long. My friend Bridget's car had broken down on the 91 freeway, and we had to wait for roadside assistance. I called my father to explain, but Simone, of course, had the final say. "You're late," she greeted me when I walked through the door, standing in the entryway with her arms crossed tightly. The clock on the wall read 20 minutes past curfew, and I knew instantly this was going to be bad. "Bridget's car broke down," I said, my voice weak from the stress of the evening. "I called to let you know." "I don't accept excuses," she snapped, cutting me off before I could finish. "You deliberately broke the rules." "I didn't," I shouted, too exhausted and frustrated to hold it in anymore. "It wasn't my fault." Her eyes narrowed with fury, and before I could blink, the slap came, hard. So hard it sent my head snapping sideways, my cheek burning from the impact. I stared at her, disbelieving. My hand instinctively flew to my face, my skin still stinging. "You hit me," I whispered, my voice barely audible, my world spinning in shock. Simone's lips curled into a tight, malicious smile. "And I'll do it again if you disrespect me," she hissed. Then, as if that wasn't enough, she grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my flesh like a vice. "You live in this house because I allow it," she spat. "Don't you forget that." I felt my world crumble right in front of me. The one person who was supposed to protect me, the one person I thought would stand up for me, was standing right there, doing nothing. Gerald, my father, was sitting on the couch, still scrolling through his phone as if nothing had happened. He didn't even look up when I screamed, when I protested. I ran to my room and locked the door, but I could still hear her voice, cold and demanding, from the other side of the door. Dad never came to check on me that night. The next morning, I still had the mark from her slap, the imprint of her fingers pressed into my skin. But when I tried to show my father, he didn't care. He barely even glanced at it. "What did you do to provoke her?" he asked, his voice empty of concern, already convinced of Simone's version. "Simone said you were disrespectful, Clara. Maybe you should think about your attitude." My heart shattered all over again. My father, my protector, the man who should have seen what was happening, he sided with her. "She's trying to teach you respect, Clara," he continued, his words cutting me more than the slap had. "You need to give her a chance." I felt my body go cold. I had spent years of my life trying to make him see me, trying to get him to care, but every time it felt like I was invisible. This wasn't just an isolated incident. This wasn't just one bad moment. Over the months that followed, the abuse escalated. She shoved me once, hard enough to push me against the wall. Another time, she grabbed my hair, yanking it so violently that I screamed in pain. I started wearing long-sleeve shirts, even when it was 90 degrees outside, to cover up the bruises. But I never told anyone. How could I? I was too scared of what would happen if I did. Scared that Dad would never believe me. Scared that he'd side with Simone again, just like he always did. The moment that changed everything happened just 2 months before my 18th birthday. It started like any other evening, but the tension in the air was palpable. I had asked Dad for permission to go to Savannah's birthday party, something I'd been looking forward to for weeks. But the second I mentioned it, Simone's face turned hard. "She has chores that need finishing," she declared with authority, cutting through the room like a knife. "I did them yesterday afternoon," I protested, already feeling the anger rise in my chest. "You'll redo everything," she snapped, her voice low and dangerous. "And you'll stay home. There's no party for you tonight." Something inside me snapped. It wasn't the first time she had taken away something I cared about, but that night, I had finally had enough. For the first time, I saw Simone for what she really was, a woman who wanted control over everything, including my life. "You're not my mother," I shouted, my voice trembling with fury. "You'll never be my mother. You're just some woman my dad married who treats me like garbage." Simone's face twisted with rage, her eyes narrowing. "What did you just say to me?" "I said you're not my mother. You don't get to control my life," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "You never will be anything more than that woman my dad married." Simone's response was swift and violent. Her lips curled into a menacing smile as she reached toward the knife block on the counter. I froze, my heart thudding violently in my chest as she grabbed the largest chef's knife. The blade gleamed under the kitchen lights like a predator's eye. "You need to learn some respect," she hissed, her voice low and chilling. "You're going to be marked so you never forget your place in this house." My breath caught in my throat. This was no longer just a fight. This was something far more dangerous. "Simone, put the knife down," Dad said, his voice shaky, but it lacked authority. There was no command, no real conviction. It was as if he were more afraid of her than he was of what she was about to do to me. I backed away, my body trembling with fear. "Dad, please, make her stop." But instead of protecting me, my father did nothing. His hands, once the hands I trusted to keep me safe, gripped me tightly from behind, holding my wrists as if they were shackles. "Dad, no! What are you doing?" I screamed, struggling against his unrelenting hold. Simone advanced toward me, her eyes wide with fury. "You need to learn. Now you'll remember who you belong to," she snarled. "Dad, stop her!" I cried, my voice raw, the panic rising in my throat. But he didn't stop her. He didn't even flinch. He simply held me down, his grip unyielding. I could feel his hands like iron around my wrists, his emotionless face staring straight ahead, refusing to look at me. Simone raised the knife, and my world slowed to a horrifying crawl. The sharp, cold metal pressed against my skin as my father held me down. "Now everyone will know who you belong to," Simone whispered, with twisted satisfaction. I screamed as the blade cut into my flesh, slicing through my arm with a pain so sharp it nearly knocked the breath from my lungs. Blood poured from the wound, pooling on the cold granite countertop. But it wasn't just the physical pain that shattered me. It was the realization that my father, my own father, was helping her do this. He was holding me down while she branded me. The pain was excruciating, and as Simone carved her initials into my skin, the tears fell uncontrollably, but I couldn't stop them. I could only wait for it to end. Finally, Simone stepped back, her breath heavy with satisfaction. I collapsed onto the floor, clutching my mutilated arm, but the worst of it wasn't the blood. It was the betrayal. The realization that the man who was supposed to protect me had chosen her over me. He had let her do this. Simone looked down at me and sneered. "Now everyone will know you're mine." And with that, she turned and walked away, as if nothing had happened. My father, without a word, followed her. I lay there, broken and bleeding, knowing I had to leave. This was no longer my home. It hadn't been for a long time. The hours following the attack were a blur of pain and disbelief. My arm throbbed, blood still seeping through the makeshift bandage I had wrapped around it, but the emotional agony was far worse. I could feel the weight of the scars already forming on my skin, but they didn't compare to the ones being etched into my heart. I couldn't stay there, not with them, not in that house that had become a prison. My mind raced with one thought: escape. But how? Where would I go? I grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling as I texted Bridget, my best friend, desperate for help. "Emergency. Need help now. Can you come get me?" She responded almost instantly. "OMD, are you okay?" "No, just hurry, please." It felt like an eternity before she arrived, but when she finally knocked on the door, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed a duffel bag, packing clothes, documents, my laptop, and my phone charger in a frantic rush. Every sound from downstairs made my heart race. My father and Simone were too preoccupied with each other to notice. I couldn't look back. I couldn't let them stop me. Bridget's car was a blur as I climbed inside, my heart hammering, my breath shallow. When she saw the blood-soaked towel wrapped around my arm, her eyes widened in shock. "Oh my God, Clara, what happened to your arm?" she gasped, her voice barely above a whisper. "My stepmother. She did this. My dad. He held me down while she carved her initials into me." Her face went pale, and for a moment I thought she might faint, but then she slammed her foot on the gas, and we sped toward the hospital. At Riverside Community Hospital, everything moved in a blur. The moment the emergency room staff saw my arm, they knew something was terribly wrong. The nurse with kind eyes cleaned and bandaged the deep wounds, and a detective took my statement. "Your father physically restrained you while she did this?" Detective Andrea Walsh asked, her voice calm but with an edge of disbelief as she took meticulous notes. "Yes," I whispered, my voice shaky. "He held my wrists while she did it." "Are you 17?" she asked, confirming the age I had given her. "Yes, but I'll be 18 in 2 months. This constitutes child abuse and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. They have to be arrested." I couldn't breathe. Relief and terror collided inside me. Relief that it was finally over, that someone was believing me, but terror about what would happen next. The police arrested both my father and Simone that night. They were charged with aggravated assault, child abuse, and unlawful restraint. My dad was additionally charged as an accomplice. Bridget's parents, Helen and Robert, were supportive beyond words, offering me a place to stay as the criminal case moved forward. They treated me like their own daughter, which was more than I had ever gotten from my own family in years. But even with the support, the pain was relentless. I was constantly looking at my arm, at the scars that would never fade. It was as if my own body had betrayed me. As the criminal case moved forward, I was forced to relive the horror, testifying in court about what had happened to me. It felt like I was giving up a part of myself with every word I spoke. Simone's attorney tried to paint me as a troubled, rebellious teenager, arguing that I had provoked the incident. My client was attempting to discipline a defiant child, he claimed, and the situation escalated beyond her control. But the medical evidence was overwhelming. The deep cuts, the defensive wounds on my wrists from where my father had restrained me, my testimony, and the testimony from Bridget and her parents about the condition I was in when I arrived at their house. These were the things that mattered. The jury deliberated for hours, but in the end, they found both Simone and my father guilty on all counts. Simone was sentenced to 14 years in state prison. My father, as an accomplice who had physically restrained me but hadn't wielded the knife himself, was sentenced to 10 years. At sentencing, the judge addressed both of them with barely contained fury. "What you did to your daughter was barbaric and unforgivable," he said, his voice shaking with disgust. "You branded her like livestock, permanently scarring her physically and psychologically. This court finds your actions utterly reprehensible." My father looked directly at me during sentencing, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Clara, I'm so incredibly sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. Please forgive me." But I couldn't answer him. There was nothing to say. Simone, on the other hand, showed no remorse. She glared at me, her eyes full of hatred, as if I were the one who had victimized her. I never once thought about forgiving my father. The months that followed were a blur of court dates, police reports, and paperwork. I was forced to relive everything. Every painful detail, every moment of betrayal, and every slice of the knife. But eventually, the dust settled. Simone was behind bars, and my father, though still my father in name, was also locked away in prison for the foreseeable future. The aftermath, however, was far from over. The physical scars on my arm were permanent, ugly reminders of what they had done to me. But the emotional scars ran deeper. I had to learn to live with the fact that the people I had loved most, the ones I had trusted to protect me, were the very ones who had hurt me the most. I moved into a small studio apartment once I turned 18, relieved to be free from the suffocating control of Simone and the indifference of my father. It was small, barely enough room for me to stretch out fully, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I kept to myself in those first few weeks, focused on surviving. I worked part-time at a Starbucks, finishing my senior year at Riverside High. The weight of what had happened still lingered in my mind, and I spent countless hours lying awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. Therapy helped. Dr. Naomi Winters, a trauma specialist, helped me understand that none of what happened was my fault. Every session with her chipped away at the guilt I had carried for so long, the guilt that told me I should have done something sooner, that I should have been stronger. Slowly I learned that it was okay to be a survivor and that healing wasn't a straight line. It came in waves, sometimes calm, sometimes overwhelming. As I worked to rebuild my life, I earned a scholarship to UC Irvine, the first real step toward independence I had ever taken. The pain of the past still haunted me, but it didn't define me. I started to feel like I had a future again, one that belonged entirely to me. I was no longer defined by the scars, the abuse, or the betrayal. My father, though, never stopped trying to reach me. He wrote me letter after letter from prison, long, rambling apologies about how Simone had manipulated him, how he'd lost himself after Mom died, and how he failed me as a father. He begged for my forgiveness, but I couldn't give it to him. I wouldn't. 3 years into his sentence, his attorney contacted me. He wanted to meet face to face to apologize in person. I thought about it for weeks, weighing the decision. Part of me was curious, wanted closure, wanted to hear him say the words that had been missing all these years, but the other part of me knew I could never forgive him. In the end, I agreed to meet him. Just once. A supervised meeting at the prison. When I saw him, I barely recognized the man who had once been my father. He was older, grayer, diminished by the years in prison. The tough exterior he'd always worn was gone, replaced by a broken man who had finally realized the consequences of his actions. "Clara," he said, his voice cracking with emotion, "thank you for coming." I sat across from him at the metal table, arms crossed tightly over my chest. "I'm not here to forgive you," I said flatly, my voice steady but distant. "I know," he replied, tears streaming down his face. "I just needed you to know how sorry I am. What I did, what we did. There's no excuse. I failed you catastrophically as a father. I let that woman poison my mind and hurt you in the most unforgivable way possible." He looked at me with desperation, as if my forgiveness would somehow heal the wound he had caused. "You held me down while she carved her initials into my skin," I said, my voice low but unwavering. "You chose her over me, your own daughter." I looked at him for a long moment, the anger inside me slowly dissipating into something colder, more painful. "I needed you to protect me," I said, my words quiet but piercing. "That was your job as my father, and when it mattered most, you didn't just fail to protect me, you actively helped hurt me. That's not something I can ever forgive." He nodded, tears still streaming down his face. "I understand," he said softly. "I don't expect your forgiveness. I just needed you to know that I'm sorry, that I love you, and that I completely understand if you never want to see me again." I sat there in silence for a long time. There was nothing more to say. There was no magic reconciliation, no grand gesture that would make everything right again. "I hope you find peace," I said, standing up, "but I won't be part of your life anymore." And with that, I walked away from the man who had failed me in every way a father could. The last time I saw him, he was still crying, but I didn't turn back. Simone never apologized. She never showed any remorse for what she had done. In fact, she spent years filing appeals, insisting she had only been trying to discipline me. Each one was denied, and as she sat in prison, the hate in her eyes never faded. But I was different. I had changed. I had learned that the scars I carried weren't a mark of ownership, as she had intended. They were a mark of survival. 5 years after the attack, I graduated from UC Irvine with a degree in social work. I wanted to help other kids, like me, who had been trapped in abusive homes, who needed someone to advocate for them when they felt like no one was listening. Today, I work for a nonprofit organization that helps youth aging out of foster care, giving them the tools to reclaim their lives. It's not easy. Healing never is. But every day, I see the impact of my work. Every day, I help someone who is fighting to survive, just like I did. I carry my scars, both visible and invisible, as a reminder of what I survived. And I wear them with pride, because I'm still here. I'm still fighting. I'm still growing. And I will never, ever let them define me again.